On your Wednesday episode of Locked On Raptors, in lieu of talking about the tanktastic battle between the Raptors and Sixers tonight, it's a little grab bag of topics. We're going to talk about Scottie Barnes and what his role on next year's team should be. Copycat teams. What should the Raptors be looking to co-opt from around the league as they build their own identity? Plus more coming up on today's show. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, March the 12th, and I am your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 11 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Blue Sky. You can also find the show on Instagram, and you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server. Link in the description of the podcast. Please join our little listener family. It's free to do, and mostly it's very kind and fun in there, unless we disagree about something, and then it's, still kind. It's not toxic, but, we'll yell at each other a little bit because we're a family, and that's what families do. Of course, you can also go and support the daily Locked On Raptors newsletter, QR code on the screen if you want to subscribe, if you're watching on YouTube, or you can go to the link in the description of the podcast if you're listening on audio, and you can sign on up. Just drop your email into the bar, and you will get piping hot emails from me 5 days a week talking about your local basketball team. Lots of other goodies in there for the low price of On the House as well. All right, on today's show, the Raptors take on the Philadelphia 76ers tonight in a game that both teams are going to really want to lose, methinks. And so instead of talking about that game and the ongoing tank of it all, which we've seemingly talked about ad nauseum over the last week and a half, we are just going to talk about some bigger picture topics. We're looking ahead to next season with your Toronto Raptors, always keeping it forward, always keeping an eye on the next good Raptors team, which could, in theory, come as soon as next year. We are going to get into the idea of it being a copycat league. Which teams around the league should the Raptors be trying to model their style after? Is it even possible in a league where everyone is an individual butterfly of skills? Plus, we'll play a little game called the Gillespie-Agbaji Spectrum, where we determine the guys on the Raptors fringe of the roster, whether they'll be part of the rotation next season or not. But off the top, we're going to welcome in our guest here. We're going to talk about some Scottie Barnes stuff and sort of what his role should be on next year's team. And that guest is our pal, Vivek Jacob from Raptors in 7 and Sportsnet. Big V, how the hell are you? Are you very excited for the basketball game tonight?
Hey, man, everything is on the line tonight. It's a big one. It is a big one. You got 2 games left against the Sixers. You got 2 games left against the Nets. This is what it comes down to. I wasn't going to let myself get excited when the Nets jumped out to that big lead over the Cavs. I was like, I know what's coming. And sure enough, the Cavs came through. So, yeah, it's a big one tonight.
Let's talk about actual fun basketball and things to look forward to next season after this tank nonsense is behind us. Scottie Barnes, he is a good basketball player. He's also had, I think, what some would call a bit of a regressive season in terms of particularly his offense. He has been a career low in terms of efficiency this season. The pull-up threes, just the threes in general, have not been falling, but there have been a lot of really ugly pull-up ones. The process hasn't been amazing. There have been some nice parts, too. I think overall, the sort of steadiness of his playmaking has come along. I think he's kind of understanding a little bit more the dynamics of how he interplays with his teammates and stuff like that. He's not kind of throwing lasers to guys who aren't expecting them. That was a big thing for him in previous years. I think he's a better, more tidy playmaker than he was in the past. And he's got that mid-range bag that seems to have really become a weapon for him. Maybe he's leaned on it a little bit too hard. We can get into that. But overall, it's been, I think, a bit of a mixed bag for Scottie. The defense obviously has been outstanding. That's been like a total, I think, frankly, dimension shifting leap from him defensively as far as what this team is capable of, what kind of defense they can build. That's been huge, and it's been a real sort of balm for me whenever I think about the offensive stuff. Going back and thinking about the defense is like, oh yeah, maybe it's not all so bad. But Big V, I guess let's start here. Overall impressions of Scottie's season as a whole. What have we learned? Is there anything left to learn as he kind of plays out the string here? Maybe going through the motions a little bit, just kind of throwing stuff at the wall. Not been terribly efficient of late. Can't say I blame him because the team isn't really playing serious basketball, but overall impressions of Scottie, and is there anything left for us to kind of glean from this year? Do you have a pretty good idea of what the Raptors should be doing with him going into next year?
Yeah, I think first off, overall, I think it's been a really good season for Scotty. I think when you look at what the objectives were for him, the goals, I think defensively, he's been an absolute standout player. I think if the team had a better record, he'd be right there in the mix for an all defensive team. And when you look at the offensive side of things, I do think obviously we would have liked to see the 3-point shot show more progression. That hasn't happened, and so it is what it is. The mid range, I do think I do like the way that he's sort of come on in that area. As you said, that he's kind of leaned on it a bit too much, and I think you know getting caught up in this whole tank season, we don't know how that's really affecting him, right? Like even there was the second game against the Magic where everyone got benched, and if you followed along after the buzzer, you could see Scotty in conversation with, I believe, Caleb Houston, and I'm pretty sure Houston was asking something about, "Hey man, what's going on?" And Scotty just put his hands up like, it is what it is, kind of, So obviously that's going to affect you in some way. He's shooting 36% from the field so far in March and just 15% from three. So I can see some of the frustrations offensively, but I think it has more to do with what the team situation is right now. And I think there's been plenty of really good Scotty to be excited about. And on some level, I do think I wrote this after the Brandon Ingram trade. I view the Ingram trade as a front office bet on Scotty, saying that, hey, because of the progress he's made, we believe that we can take a bigger step next year, and so let's maybe address one of the weaknesses on the team, one of the weaknesses of Scotty's game, by getting this guy in Brandon Ingram who can get you a shot at any time. And it takes kind of that number one scorer pressure off him. And I think that's where, in terms of assessing where he was before this season, going into next season, overall, I'd say it's been a big success.
Yeah, like I think it's fair to look at the overall offensive output and say, really, this has been a great season for Scottie Barnes. But I think if you just sort of take the 10,000-foot view, like, again, the defensive stuff, that has been as important a leap as anything that's happened with the team this season on like an individual skill development basis. Scotty going from, pretty high impact defender last year, guy who was making a lot of defensive plays, to a guy who now he's on the floor, the team is good at defense. Like, that is significant. That's enormous going forward. And I do think that kind of outstrips a lot of the offensive stuff. And look, if the goal of this season was to figure out what Scottie Barnes is offensively, I know there were hopes and dreams that he could be the primary creator of a good offense. And I think there was reason to believe that could be true. I think that's been dispelled. I don't think he's going to be the best offensive player on a good offense at this point, but that's okay. Like, there are ways to weaponize the things he does well in ways that aren't him kind of starting from the top of the arc and leaning into pull-ups and having to create from a standstill. I think there are other ways to kind of make him a more effective player. And I think the Ingram trade is one. I think quickly playing the way he has of late is going to unlock a lot with Scottie Barnes as well. You're seeing those two really kind of find the chemistry of late. I think their on-court metrics look pretty good. They're winning their minutes together. And so, yeah, like it's a different shape of stardom, I think, for Scottie Barnes than a lot of people hoped for. But I do think, he's still very clearly, to me, an obvious 25% max deserving player. I don't think there's any concern about the contract or anything like that as it kicks in next year. And it just might be that he's the best defensive player on a good team and the second or third option on offense. And that's totally fine. Like, I still think there's an efficient, like 22, 8, and 6 somewhere in there that, maybe is just gotten to in a bit of a different way than the primary creative engine, pathway that I think it felt like was still there for him at the start of this season. If you're Darko Rajakovic, you're kind of sketching out how next season is going to look. Like, where are you trying to utilize Scottie Barnes? What kinds of shots are you filtering out? What are you kind of doing to trim the fat? And where are you trying to kind of have him lean into next season to really optimize and sort of get the efficiency back on track, because the efficiency has been bad. Like, there's no doubt about it. The threes not falling, the catch and shoots not falling is a little alarming. He's in the 20s from catch and shoots as much as he is from pull-ups. Like, it's not ideal. But, again, there are ways, I think, to kind of morph his shot chart a little bit to just get more out of him. What would you be doing if you were Darko Rajakovic?
Yeah, so I'm probably saying, hey, let's take away the pull-up three completely. And even though the catch and shoot numbers are down, that's probably the shot that you'll live with. You see what that looks like next to Brandon Ingram's shot creation. You kind of roll from there. At the end of the day, like, you are going to need him to just take catch and shoots, because you're going to have Jakob Poeltl on the floor. So if you have two guys that aren't going to shoot at all from the outside, that's just going to make for a pretty clunky offense. So the catch and shoots just have to be there, and that's something that he has to improve at. I think, in terms of funneling his best basketball, you're probably trying to get him in the post as much as possible. I do think, the screen and roll opportunities, I'm just really excited to see what a Brandon Ingram, Scotty Barnes pick and roll looks like, and just have that size. And, when you use quickly in that as well, I think it's going to be really interesting. So those are probably the first things that stick out. You're going to have situations where Brandon's going to be off the ball, and, whether it's above the break or whether that's in the corner, and you're using Yak in the action now. I think those are opportunities for Scotty as well. I think, to sum it all up, as much early offense that you can get for Scotty, that's probably the best, outside of him taking a pull-up three. And I think that's where you probably want to find his success. It's almost like, hey, early clock, if you want to go for your own offense and we can get you those shots or get you into shot creation positions, from the post, that's ideal. If not, let's, bring out those playmaking chops as we get later in the clock, or get you into some catch and shoot opportunities, or, cutting to the rim, or, just crashing the offensive glass.
Yeah, I think a big part of making him work with Brandon Ingram is going to be having Scotty live at the rim more often. This season, a career low, 28% of his shots have come at the rim per clean the glass. That's got to be closer to 35, even 40%. His career high is 38% in his second season. He's just got to get to the rim more. And I think he can do it. I think there are ways to make it work. I think there are ways to, weaponize him more as a cutter, as you alluded to, or in pick and roll situations, whether it's with Quickly, whether it's with Ingram, whatever it might be, like, have him as a work as a role man. I think he's shown in his career that that's a thing he can do. He's kind of a jack of all trades, and some of his best moments as a pro have come playing as a small ball big, in theory on offense at least, and then creating out of that, getting to the rim out of that. I also think, there's a lot. I don't think you totally remove the possessions where he has the ball in his hands either. Like, I think there's plenty to be done, in particular with inverted pick and roll with Emmanuel Quickly. I think we've seen it a couple times where just the shooting threat of Quickly, it opens up avenues for Scotty to get downhill and get to the rim. Like, so many of the recent sort of blow-bys and drives he's had for buckets of late have come as a result of Quickly comes and sets a screen, and the defense is freaking the hell out because they are like, oh God, this guy is going to go shoot from 35 feet on the far wing. We have to think about this and think about the Scotty of it all. And before you know it, Scotty's at the rim scoring. I do think there's a lot to kind of tap into there. We'll come back on the other side. We're going to get into the idea of what teams around the league should the Raptors be trying to co-opt the style of. Are there teams that maybe make sense more than others? We'll do that coming up in just a sec. Today's show is brought to you by Wayfair. Your home should reflect your style, and with Wayfair, it's easier than ever to make that happen. Whether you're looking for a simple refresh or tackling a big home project, Wayfair has everything you need in one place. Wayfair's huge selection makes it easy to find the perfect piece no matter your space or budget, from cozy furniture and stylish decor to kitchen essentials and outdoor must-haves. That nice weather's on the way. If you want to get yourself some outdoor seating, a great way to do it is by going to Wayfair. They have it all at prices that fit your budget. Right now, my wife and I are looking for a chair for our room next to this office as we're redoing it, as we've got a kid on the way, and we're just, shuffling around our space a little bit. And Wayfair, we're certainly going to go and peruse the chairs over there, because chairs, like, it's an important purchase. You want to get it right. You don't want to overspend either on a chair that's going to be in an extra guest room, but you want to have a good chair. If you want to sit down and read or whatever it might be, you got to find that comfort, baby. Wayfair can help you do that. Head over to wayfair.com and find something that's just your style today. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Today's show is also brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money. That's what it used to be. A lot of waiting, a lot of worrying, then more waiting, worrying, wondering, especially for me. I'm a freelancer. My taxes are a nightmare every year. But now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives you your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All you got to do is go and check out turbotax.com to get yourself an expert, to get rid of all that waiting, wondering, and worrying. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at turbotax.com/guarantees. Back at it here with Vivek Jacob, Big V from Raptors in 7 and Sportsnet, among other places on the dang internet. Big V, looking around the league, kind of imagining what the Raptors are going to play like. This is very much a speculative exercise because we haven't seen the Raptors play with their arguably best offensive player in Brandon Ingram yet. And so we're still kind of piecing together the sort of visions of what this is all going to look like going into next year. I'm curious. This is something I've been kind of noodling on a little bit for quite some time, even before they got Brandon Ingram. Just kind of thinking, looking around the league, are there teams that the Raptors should be trying to replicate? Whether it's how they run their offense, how they run their defense, how they, in general, kind of approach playing basketball. And it's a tough question to kind of answer, because the beautiful thing about basketball is that every player is different, and it creates individualized team contexts across the NBA that are tough to replicate because all these guys are different and have their own little flavor. But, you can kind of find some broad similarities in terms of how teams play. And obviously, I actually think there's quite a bit of stylistic diversity in the league right now. I think that's sort of a thing that gets overblown as like, oh, everyone just shoots threes. Like, no, the Celtics just shoot a lot of threes, and like a couple of the bad teams do. But for the most part, there's a lot of, I think, variability in terms of how teams play, because I think there's a lot of variability in terms of the skills of the best players across the league right now. But if you're the Raptors, if you're Darko Rajakovic and the coaching staff, you're in the lab. What kind of teams are you looking up the tape on to try to build out what this team is going to look like next season, Big V?
Yeah, I think we've had some interesting discussions on this already. I think if you look at the functionality of the individual players, I think I can see some similarities to the Bucks. Obviously, when you compare, Quickly and Scotty in actions, you think of Dame and Giannis being like the peak of that.
Sure.
And then, obviously you can't really compare Brook Lopez and Jakob Poeltl, because obviously Brook Lopez offers that amazing spacing option, which Yak can't. But Yak obviously brings some of that playmaking, that facilitating to the table. Now, is Brandon Ingram going to be like a different type of, like, in a similar vein, but when Chris Middleton was put next to Giannis, it was to alleviate some of that ball handling late in games and be like, hey, you know what? You can't just foul Giannis. We've got this guy who can hit big shots, and kind of came to fruition perfectly when they won the championship in 2021. And so, yeah, I think Brandon Ingram kind of becomes that release valve, and you kind of say, hey, okay, we've got this guy who can take the big shot, who we can put the ball in his hands, no problem. Playmaking is probably a bit underrated. And so I think from an individual functionality standpoint, I probably look at those guys pretty similarly. And then,
Mhm.
RJ kind of becomes an X factor and all of that, right? And
Right.
uh, in terms of a player comp, uh, obviously, Darko's been trying to get him to watch as much Ginobili film, and we've kind of seen that evolution with his playmaking and whatnot. He's not quite Ginobili, but we've
Who
seen
is?
him
Who
take
is?
we've seen him take steps in that direction.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how I viewed it from an offensive standpoint. Um, and yeah, I know you had a couple of teams, and in terms of just the overall running of the offense that were pretty interesting to think of.
Well, first off, to pick up on the Bucks, I wrote the Bucks down as like a defensive match for the Raptors, though I didn't. I probably didn't really consider the similarities between like Quickly and Ingram and Lillard and Middleton too. Like I do think there's something there in terms of again, it's not the same. Everyone's different. Giannis is clearly light years better than Scotty Barnes. I think
Yeah,
you could argue Brandon Ingram is maybe a slightly better, more sort of talented version of Chris Middleton to kind of balance that out for sure. Quickly Lillard, obviously, that tilts one way. Emmanuel Quickly's better, obviously. But when it comes to the defense, I really think that the Scotty Pirtle duo can do a lot of the things that Giannis and Brook Lopez do. Obviously, Giannis and Brook Lopez at their absolute apex were unbelievable. Like the 2021 through 2023 run, they were absolutely outstanding. They were impenetrable. They were this wall of arms and height and shot blocking and rim deterrence that's really tough to replicate. And I don't quite
don't
think the
forget
Raptors
about this year's NBA Cup final.
it's totally true. You're right. I think, yeah, like, Scotty doesn't have the size Giannis does. Giannis is basically 7 feet tall and his arms goes for days. Like, Scotty's got great wingspan. He's obviously huge. He's not Giannis because no one is. And Brook Lopez is one of the largest men we've ever seen in the NBA, just in terms of height plus width. Pirtle's not quite that. But in terms of like how they deploy those two, I think it is quite similar. And I do think the numbers bear out that, Scotty plus Yak as a duo, that's going to give you a pretty high baseline. This season, Big V, those two guys together, Scotty and Jakob lineups, nearly 1,700 possessions together for those two. Any combination of three other players with them. The Raptors have 110.6 defensive rating. That would rank fourth in the NBA over the course of the whole season. That's not nothing. That is a pretty high floor to have with those two guys on the floor together. They play a lot of minutes together, obviously. That's a pretty juicy sample size, 1,700 possessions. That is, and considering what else is going on defensively on this team at times, I think damn impressive. In fact, it's better than Lopez and Giannis this year. They're at 110.9 in all their minutes together for the Bucks this season. That's very legit, and I think that can be the basis for how you build your defense. Obviously, you need to have a little more juice on the wings defensively. I do think the length of Brandon Ingram is going to help. It would be great if you had an Andre Jackson Jr. type guy to just go throw on opposing dudes. Maybe that was your Davion Mitchell, just a smaller version of it. He's no longer around, all defense, no offense guy. But I do think you can get away a little bit with not having, necessarily locked down guard and wing defense because you have those two dudes kind of cleaning up messes at the back. And when they've been together this season, they've been very good. 110.6 defensive rating. That's extremely good stuff in the modern NBA. So yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels to the Bucks that are worth kind of tapping into here. Offensively, a team that kind of comes to mind, and it's not the same because the Raptors don't have the shooting this team does, and they don't shoot threes like this team does. This team is routinely near the top of the league in threes attempted and near the bottom in rim attempts. I kind of wrote down inverted Warriors, right? The Warriors are this team that runs all this intricate off-ball stuff. They, have like a million different things going on and every single action they've got. They've got the gravity of Steph Curry, obviously. I'm not saying Emmanuel Quickly is Steph Curry, but among players in the NBA right now who can replicate what Steph Curry does as an on and off ball shooting threat, it's not a very long list before you get to Emmanuel Quickly. He's that good as a high volume, high difficulty off and on ball 3-point shooter that, again, no one is Steph Curry. I'm not saying he is Steph Curry. Obviously, he's nowhere near the on ball player that Steph Curry is. But in terms of replicating the style, I think you're getting pretty close there. You're kind of in the same wheelhouse at least. And so, I think the Raptors can kind of weaponize that. Plus, your Grady Dix or your Jacoby Walters. Again, RJ's kind of a strange, kind of not an easy puzzle piece fit into any of this. But I think the way they run their stuff is very Warriors-like. It's very obviously influenced by the Warriors. And instead of it being an offense that's geared towards getting a billion threes off, I think it's maybe more one that kind of flows things towards the rim, which they've done beautifully this season. They're number 3 in rim frequency in the entire league this season. And I think they can kind of lean further into that. And the shooting that Quickly and Grady Dick in particular provide, that helps to kind of pull apart defenses to make those avenues to the rim a little bit easier to find. What do you think about that? Inverted Warriors, is that crazy?
I don't think it's crazy because, again, when you look at the overall team schemes and the way that Darko wants this team to play and the way that they've been playing, I can see it. And obviously, they've got one of the most singular talents we've seen in league history in Steph Curry. And that changes a lot. But again, from an individual standpoint, if you're looking at, another side of Scotty Barnes' game, you look at a Draymond Green. Right.
Totally.
And so I think, the inverted portion in terms of what's around that gets interesting. So, yeah, I don't think you're off base on that at all.
You heard it here first. Scotty Barnes is basically just a hybrid of Giannis Antetokounmpo and Draymond Green. Yeah, I mean, a couple other teams I kind of wrote down here. I wrote down the Nuggets. Again, they don't have Nikola Jokic. They never will have Nikola Jokic, obviously. But in terms of how they run their stuff, it's not all that different. And in terms of the shots they get, I mean, the most, I think, similar shot chart in the NBA to the Raptors is Denver's. Like, Denver is very low on 3-point frequency. They're number 30 in 3-point frequency. The Raptors are 29th. The Nuggets are first in attempts at the rim as a percentage of their shots. The Raptors are third. There's not a whole lot of mid-range going on. The Raptors have a little more mid-range going on just because there's a lot of short mid-range stuff in their package. But like the Nuggets are a rim and threes team, and they lean rim over threes for sure. They hit their threes at a very high clip, which is why they're so damn good. But I think the Raptors, in terms of replicating a sort of shot distribution, the Nuggets are kind of right there. And again, they don't have a Nikola Jokic driving the whole bus. It's more of a, greater than the sum of its parts situation than that guy is the part type of situation in Denver. But, as far as how they play, I think there's some similarities and some parallels you can find there. We'll come back on the other side here and get into a little game where we're going to play with the fringe guys on the roster. It's the Gillespie-Agbaji spectrum. Who's a guy? Who's not a guy? Coming up in just 1 second. Today's show is brought to you by friends at Skims. And again, we get to talk about underwear on the show, which is my favorite thing to do, talking about my underwear. I heard all about the women's line of Skims. And when I found out they were making underwear for men, I got real excited. I got even more excited when Skims sent me a couple pairs. And man, oh man, are these things extremely comfortable. They very much live up to the hype. I am someone who am very particular about my underwear. If I find a pair or like a brand I like, I tend to be very brand loyal because a lot of the brands out there, they screw it up. They're bunchy. They're hot. They don't really fit. They don't stay where you want them to stay. Skims very much do. They are extremely comfortable, breathable, light. They stay in place. I wear them when I play sports. I wear them when I go for walks. I wear them when I'm sitting around the house. They're great for all situations, and I highly recommend you go check them out. I like the longer boxer brief, but I also have a pair of the shorter boxer briefs. Makes me feel like GSP out there. They're great, building the confidence. Love it. Go shop Skims Men's at skims.com/LockedInNBA and Skims stores. Let them know that we sent you after you place your order. Select podcast in the survey and select our show in the drop down menu that follows. Skims, get some damn underwear, would you? Wrapping it up here on your Wednesday edition of Locked On Raptors. We're going extra long today because there will be no podcast on Friday as I will be out in the boonies visiting my parents because I'm on vacation, okay? So apologies for the longer episode today, but maybe there's no need to apologize for that. You simply need this mid-March Raptors content, baby. We're going to play the fringe roster guy game, or as I have called it, the Agbaji Gillespie spectrum. Essentially, guys who are playing heavy minutes for the Raptors right now who are kind of on the fringes of the plans for the team. They are either a Freddie Gillespie or an Ochai-Agbaji. Freddie Gillespie, of course, had himself a great little run of looking like a perfectly cromulent third big man down the stretch of the Tampa season where things were awful and the Raptors had no bigs, and he seemed like he was dropped from the heavens to be tall and play basketball for your Toronto Raptors, and then he didn't stick around because he wasn't all that great. Then you have your Ochai-Agbaji, a guy who last year was playing heavy minutes for the no-good tanking Raptors, and turned out, wow, he's actually a guy. He's sticking around. Our guy Big V on camera here was very much at the forefront of the Ochai-Agbaji hype wagon, and he was very much right in the long run. Kudos to you, sir. So we're going to run through 5 guys on the fringes of the Raptors roster and rotation right now, and just say whether they're a Gillespie or an Agbaji going into next year. Of course, there's room to sort of find the gaps in between if you want, but you know, this is a podcast. We got to have hardened takes, baby. So let's begin with AJ Lawson. AJ Lawson coming off the 32-point, 12-rebound game. Is he an Agbaji or a Gillespie or something in between?
Yeah. Oh man. I think the way he's playing right now, he's something in between. If I had to pick, I'd probably say he leans not as far on the Gillespie spectrum, but he's shading closer to that side of it. And you know, who would be in the middle of this? Is it like, is it the Jeff Dowtin?
Yeah, I guess like you hang around the roster for a little bit. Everyone thinks you're maybe better than you are. Yeah, let's say Jeff Doughton's the middle of this. Yes,
the coach loves you.
Yeah. The coach loves you and then never plays you. Yeah, even when you go to Philly together. Sorry, yeah, Gillespie, Dowtin, or Agbaji. We've landed on the 3 now.
Yeah. So yeah, let's go with, you know, just a shade maybe below Jeff Dowtin.
Okay.
I think the 3 ball is obviously the thing that has to stick for him. And what he's had like 2 games where he shot like 10 for 14, and he's had 2 games where he's shot like 2 for 16. So
yeah.
So we're gonna have to see how that nets out over the next, you know, what is it, 17 games. And then, you know, we'll see where he shakes out as a player. But obviously, you know, he's someone who hasn't got too much opportunity for a reason. And, you know, I think he is someone, you know, in terms of an individual matchup defensively, like you can kind of bully him a little bit. And so I think
a little skinny,
yeah. And so I think that takes away from viewing his ceiling at his position, especially. And so I think those are the things that will generally hold him back from getting an extended run, you know, on a team that's not tanking.
Yeah, I feel the need to preface this because I always feel like a wet blanket when we talk about end of roster guys, because like I'm rooting for all of these guys to hit like 100%.
Yes.
I wasn't rooting for Jonte Porter necessarily. And that was even before all this stuff. I just thought he wasn't very fun or good. But like for the most part, like I root for these guys to hit. I want them to be successful. And it's great when these guys do break through. More often than not, they're not going to, because that's just the math of the NBA. There are 450 roster spots, and most of these guys on the fringes are not going to find themselves on roster spots when the musical chairs wheels stop, or the musical chairs music stops in you know, October, whatever it is. But yeah, like Lawson, I think because of the gunner's spirit that lies deep within, I think there's a chance that he can kind of carve himself out, something similar to a Jameson Battle type role. Honestly, he's clearly not the same shooter that Battle is. Battle's just like this natural, you know, guy who's going to bang 45% of his looks. Apparently, Lawson's, you know, you're hoping he can get to like high 30s on very high volume, and he's very shot ready and all of that stuff. I also have concerns about the defense. I think he very much is a Dowtin in this this game we're doing here, but rooting for him as hard as I've rooted for anybody. Of course, he's a CEBL guy. If we could have a long-term NBA player come from the CEBL, that boosts my agenda, and so I'm rooting for it. But yeah, I'd say he's more of a Dowtin here. Jared Rhoden. He's been kind of fun. He's like long. He might be the most cut man on the team. Watch out, Ochai-Agbaji. Would like to see those two deadlift one another, just to see who's got more sauce in that department. You know, he's a very square man. He seems to have like really good defensive hands. He can kind of finish through contact around the rim. The shooting, I don't know. We'll see. He's also like 25 years old. Is Jared Rhoden a Gillespie, a Dowtin, or an Agbaji?
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting one. I will probably say he is a tick above um Lawson, but
Hmm.
I'd say he's still below Dowtin.
Okay. Yeah,
And
I think that's fair.
I think that, in terms of the things he's done well, I do like the way that he attacks the basket. I do like that there's just a general disposition about him and intensity that he brings,
Hmm.
and he plays the right way. Uh, I do think that maybe in terms of why I put Roden a tick above Lawson is probably because I see a bit more there defensively.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, you got to be able to stick on both ends of the floor. You mentioned, we'll see what's what with the jump shot. So, yeah, I'd say that's probably a fair assumption. You put him above Lawson, but below
Hmm.
down, or maybe right with
Yeah.
down.
Yeah, I'd say he's like firmly with Dowden. He's already got the two-way for next season, so it seems like he's going to be around. It seems like they're a little bit invested in him, so I think there's just more runway for him to maybe carve out a spot. I wouldn't be shocked at all if one of these two guys, Lawson or Roden, is part of the rotation at some point next year for whatever stretch. You get some injuries or a guy really pops or whatever. I think both being on the roster is probably a little far-fetched, but yeah, I'm with you. I kind of agreed on everything you said. I think Lawson maybe projects as a better shooter, Roden a better defender. You let him battle it out and see where it comes out in the wash. Let's go to Jamison Battle. He feels like the most entrenched. He's obviously signed to an NBA deal here, but this is really about being in the rotation next season. And I do wonder if there's going to be room for him in the rotation when you start to go down the list of, wow, there's like a lot of pretty good players on this team. Obviously the 3-point shooting, he continues to be the number one 3-point shooting rookie in this class. He's awesome. He's like I think he's leading the team in true shooting percentage as well, like 64%. All very good stuff. I think he does a little bit on the glass to kind of help, keep him out there as well. Defensively is kind of an adventure sometimes. Where are you at with Jamison Battle? Maybe he doesn't quite fit the description here as a guy who's already signed up for multiple years, but not all those years are guaranteed. These things can change, and that's the back few spots on a roster are always kind of fungible. Where are you at with Jamison Battle? Is he a Gillespie, a Dowtin, or an Agbaji?
So above Dowtin, I
Hmm.
do think that the shooting ability really takes him to uh, a special place on this roster on this team.
He's the golden boy, the
Yeah,
prized child.
yeah, and so I think that is going to be huge for him going forward. I think the X factor is going to be the defense. I think he's someone that gives effort, but you know, I just don't know that the ability is quite there. And so
Hmm.
what he can do to maybe not strengthen, but maybe just like improve his lateral quicks, improve his decision making, improve his reading of offenses. I think that's uh something that can maybe help him on that end of the floor. So uh that's probably his biggest task over the summer. Um and yeah, I think he'd probably still net out as like well below what I saw uh in Abaji.
Hmm.
But I would put him above Doughton right now.
I think of all the guys we're going to talk about today, he's the closest to an Agbaji for sure. And they're the most invested in him, so it gives him some runway. Let's quickly go through Orlando Robinson and Colin Castleton. Let's just talk about them both together. Where do you got Robinson and Castleton on the Gillespie, Doughton, Agbaji scale?
Yeah, I mean Castleton, I'd probably say is the closest to Gillespie.
Hmm.
I'd
Hmm.
be surprised if he has a serious involvement with the team next season. Um, and then with Robinson, I think he's had some nice moments. I think he's someone that, especially in these final 17 games, we might see some nice numbers. And uh, I think there's, uh, the finishing needs to be better. I think that the overall, uh, reading of the game needs to be better. But I do think that you know he's a fine piece for now. But
Hmm.
I think both of these guys, if they're playing the minutes, especially Robinson, if he's playing the minutes that he's playing right now next season, the Raptors
Something's
have a
gone horribly wrong, I would say. Yes.
problem.
Um, yeah. I'm with you. I think both guys are pretty close to Gillespie on. I think, Castleton is firmly a Gillespie. I think Robinson is more between Dowtin and Gillespie, but I think maybe tilting towards more Gillespie to me. There's not a whole lot of offensive stuff going on there, man. I know the broadcast keeps on pitching that he can shoot. I don't think he can shoot. Like not very well. Hitting one of every 5 or 6 you take is not, to me, being, he's not like changing the way defenses defend or anything like that. Those shots are always super duper wide open for a reason. I do think he's very good at being huge. There's a skill there. Like he's a big guy. He can kind of, fill gaps defensively. Sure. But yeah, like I would be pretty surprised if he's on the team next year. Honestly, I don't think they need much better than Orlando Robinson from a backup center. Like I think most backup centers are not very good. And I think if you can kind of get someone who's just like 20% better than him and then sprinkle in Scotty and Mobo as your other backup 5 options, you can weather the season just fine, assuming Pirtle doesn't miss like a significant chunk of time. And so I'm not like super pressed about getting someone all that much better, but someone a little bit better would be kind of nice, I think. Even though, yeah, Robinson has a couple moments here and there. Big V, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thanks for going along. Do you have anything you want to promote for the good people out there?
Just usual stuff, man. Raptors in 7 Substack is back going strong. I am through my vacation. I am through the jet lag of adjusting to the 13-hour time difference. So you can just look out for that. You can follow me on Twitter. You can follow me on Blue Sky at Vivek Jacob.
Hell yeah. Everyone follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. It's much appreciated when you go and support the show, support Big V's work, support mine by going to the newsletter, QR code on the screen. If you want to go subscribe, you can go to the link in the description of the podcast. If you're listening on audio, to drop your email in the box and get the Locked On Raptors daily newsletter 5 days a week, although I don't think there'll be one this Friday. But either way, thank you so much for rocking with us. We very much appreciate you being here all the way through, even in the doldrums of the season that we are currently in. Enjoy Raptors Sixers, I guess. We'll talk to you on Thursday to talk about that game, I guess. In the meantime, thanks so much for hanging. Bye-bye. God.